Welcome back. In this section, we'll be talking about understanding Scala behind the scenes. We'll do that in 3 parts. First, we'll talk about Java interoperation. Then we'll talk about profiling Scala. And lastly, we'll talk about debugging Scala in an IDE. First, let's talk about Java interoperation. We'll look at collection interop between Java collections and Scala collections so that you can use Java libraries from Scala and expose your Scala libraries so they're usable from Java. Then we'll talk about what Scala looks like out of the box to Java code. This will be an instructive look at how the mapping occurs between the two and why they can coexist on the JVM. Lastly, we'll talk very briefly about keeping advanced Java collections in mind when you're doing certain things in the Scala world. Let's get started. First, let's fire up Scala and import java-util.list, only we'll rename it to JList, and linked list, which again we'll rename to JLinkedList. Now, in Scala, I can declare a variable that is a regular Java util list, contains strings, and I can put into it, instantiating along the way, a regular JLinkedList that contains strings. Nothing special here, it works exactly the way that it would in Java. Then I can add A, I can add B, and if I look at my JList again, same thing, we're interacting with it just like we would in Java. Now keep in mind that Java lists are mutable, so by default they have an add function, they have a function to get an element at a particular index, and JLinked lists, same thing, they're mutable behind the scenes. Now let's talk about creating a Scala list. We'll call this slist. It's a list of string again, and we'll go ahead and set it up with our shortcut syntax. Whoops, we missed a bracket there. And we've got a Scala list with, again, A and B in it. Now, one thing that we can't do is my slist2, we can't declare a Scala list string and put a JList directly into it. Java util lists and Scala immutable lists are completely different. Obviously, one is mutable, the other is immutable, but also the interfaces are completely different. I also can't call Scala list methods on JLists. If I tried to do this on slist, it would work just fine. Now, this looks good. There's obviously a difference between the two. The question is, can we bridge that divide? Well, Scala provides a scala.collection.javaconverters container, and that container actually has inside it a bunch of implicits and helpers to allow you to communicate between the two collection types. So it allows you to put a wrapper around a Scala type to treat it as a Java type, and a wrapper around a Java type to treat it as a Scala type. So you would import scala.collection.javaconverters._, the ._ is important. And then once you have that, now I can say, okay, my slist2 equals my JList.asScala. So we've got this implicit as Scala that's been added to certain Java collections, and this implicit as Java that's been added to certain Scala collections to do that bridging. So when we do this, we see that my slist is actually not a list, it's a mutable buffer. And that's because that is sort of the most abstract type in Scala that maps most directly to the list interface that Java has. Now, let's try taking my slist2 and adding to it. You'll see that we can't because there's no add method on mutable buffers. But let's try instead using Scala syntax. My slist2 plus equals C. You'll see this buffer now has these 3 things. Now what happened to the original? You'll see it also has those same 3 entries. So even though we're creating this wrapper and it's now a different type, behind the scenes, Scala makes sure that any updates to the mutable state in this mutable buffer are reflected in the mutable state in the backing Java list. Moreover, if I took slist2 and said as Java, and I checked if that was the same as my JList, the answer is yes. So behind the scenes, Scala takes care of making sure that the bridge is high fidelity. It makes sure that any updates to the bridged object are reflected in the backing object, and any updates in the backing object are also reflected in the bridge object. So if I added to my JList D, and I looked at my SList2, you'll see that it has D again. So that's pretty cool. What do we do, however, with immutable data structures? So let's take my SList, right? This is a Scala list, and we'll put it in my JList2, and we'll do an as Java here. Now you see here we have an explicit seek wrapper, and it contains the original list that we were working with. What happens if we try to add something here? Try to add a C. We get an unsupported operation exception. So actually, by default, the way that Scala bridges immutable collections simply throws unsupported operations when mutable operations try to be executed on those immutable underlying collections. Very, very straightforward, and it makes sure that even if we toss our list over the wall, basically, if we toss our list over the wall, everything still ends up fine. There's no danger of someone updating some weird state that Scala doesn't know how to deal with. There's also no danger that they'll try and update some state, Scala won't find out about it, and we end up with an unsynced data structure. So that's pretty easy. There are a lot of collections that can be converted between collection types. Sets, maps, even concurrent maps can be converted back and forth between Java and Scala types. So definitely look at the API documentation for Java converters to see what all the options are. Or another way to do it is just to use a REPL like this one to explore some of the different data types and how they can be converted to Java and back to Scala and vice versa. So that is the core of how Java collections interoperate. The second question is, okay, how does all of this stuff that we're throwing around actually look to Java? And a really good way to explore what the method structures that we work with are turned into from a Java perspective is to throw exceptions. So if you look here, we see a full kind of stack trace. And this stack trace shows us certain interesting characteristics like these $signs that are being populated in. These are often a sign of something that's being done in the Scala layer that we don't necessarily have a direct mapping to in the Java layer. Let's try something very simple. We'll try an object singleton, and it'll have a def throw a thing, and that'll just throw an exception, a new exception with a string test, and we'll call it. Now you see here, all of this stuff is Ammonite specific noise, but all of this stuff is very real. And you see here that we have singleton dot throw a thing in our stack trace. So even though the object is named singleton in the stack trace, it's referred to as singleton $. That's because in Scala, a singleton is represented behind the scenes in Java as a singleton $sign class. And in fact, it tracks its own instance in a subfield of that singleton $sign class. So if you ever need to interact with a Scala singleton from Java, you'll need to understand a little bit of that. And there's documentation available online on how to do it, but it's important to know that everything is not as it seems. You can't just invoke methods, you can't just reference the singleton by its name directly from Java. Another good question is, how do anonymous functions get managed? So let's actually do something else. We'll do 1, 2, 3, filter, and we will again throw a new exception test. When we look at this, we see a whole lot of Scala collection bits of the stack trace. Scala collections often have a few layers that they go through to actually execute some of their implementations. And then we have this bit, $anon function $res20 $1. This is the kind of shape that you will see most anonymous functions take. So if we have an anonymous function, it usually contains some tidbit that says anon fun, and then it has some additional information generated from data about that anonymous function that forms one really long name. And it's usually, back here, it's in a certain context. So if we did this inside a singleton, again, throw a thing, but instead of doing this, we did our little filter dance over here. And we called singleton.throwAthing again. You'll see this time the anon fun, the data is a little clearer. So we know now that the anonymous function is inside the singleton object, and it's inside the throwAthing variable, or rather method. So we get some context information from the surrounding names around this anon fun chunk. So you can see actually that even inside the Scala collection library, there's an anonymous function involved. So this is kind of how you can get a feel for what the code that Scala generates looks like if you were to try to interact with it from Java. There's a lot of $signs, there's a lot of kind of weird variable names that are cloaking the more advanced features that Scala provides that aren't directly supported in Java yet. Now, one more thing we wanted to talk about is Java collections. Java has some really powerful collections, and just because you're working in Scala doesn't mean that you can't use them. So just like we saw earlier, we can instantiate a linked list without any problems, a Java util linked list. We can also instantiate, for example, my queue, a java.concurrent.array blocking queue of string. Oops, java.util.concurrent, my bad. And you'll see here that, we didn't invoke the constructor correctly, but fundamentally, the point here is that we can reference array blocking queues. We can instantiate them just fine. We'll go ahead and just give this an initial size. And we can get an array blocking queue out the other end. And we can interact with it. We can add an A. We can add a B. We can look at the queue. We can dequeue. Whatever we're trying to do, we can look at its methods in our REPL. So we can take one thing off the queue. Oops, sorry. We can take an element off the queue. We can take another element off the queue. We can look at the queue again, and it's empty now. So all of these interactions work exactly like they would in Java, which means all of these more advanced collections that Java has are perfectly available for us in Scala. These collections that have been essentially refined and battle tested and really designed very nicely over the course of the 25 to 30 years that Java has been around. So I encourage you to keep those in mind when you're doing any sort of collections work that requires some more kind of corner case details or features or what have you.